Have you heard the name Father Seraphim Rose? I suppose it's likely if you found my channel, you know who I'm talking about. That's not the correct way to describe him per Orthodox usage. According to the Holy Tradition, a monk gives up his last name at tonsure, and it's improper to refer to him thusly. So, first of all, we shouldn't be saying his last name. And what's more, Father Seraphim, Hieromonk Seraphim of Platina, that's the city in Northern California, where he asceticized and saved his soul, has been canonized by the Church of Georgia. Is there anyone that watches my channel that thinks that the Orthodox Church of Georgia, which has been Orthodox since the 4th century, is not an Orthodox jurisdiction? Really, is there anybody? Is there anyone watching? I'm just checking. Please. Old calendars too. I'm curious. Comment if you like, but is there anybody who thinks that there aren't Orthodox bishops in Georgia? So, an Orthodox bishop in Georgia has glorified, which is to say canonized, Hieromonk Seraphim of Platina. They've chanted the full service to him in Georgian. They have icons of him adorning their temples and homes. So, what in the world are we saying Father Seraphim Rose for anyway? It's ridiculous. God forgive us, and Father Seraphim forgive us for dishonoring your holy memory. Saint Seraphim of Platina is a personal favorite of mine for a number of reasons, not least of which he is the first American saint. And by American saint, I mean American the way that our founding fathers understood the term American. Certain people qualified for that label and others didn't. So when I say he's the first American saint, I'm using it in that sense. I do realize there were saints on the North American continent before Saint Seraphim of Platina, all the way back to the 18th century. We just recently celebrated the entrance of Orthodox monastics, Orthodox missionaries, to the North American continent. That was a few days ago. Saints Herman and Juvenali. 1794. So, of course, when I say that Saint Seraphim of Platina is the first American saint, I'm using it in a very specific sense. By the way, Saint Seraphim of Platina was largely responsible for the canonization, for the glorification of Saint Herman of Alaska. Saint Herman of Alaska had not been canonized when Fathers Seraphim and Herman founded the Brotherhood of Blessed Herman of Alaska. So it was largely their work to see their own heavenly patron formally, properly canonized. And he's, of course, internationally venerated as Saint Herman of Alaska. But what about Father Seraphim's legacy? What about the legacy of Saint Seraphim of Platina for our time? God forgive me, I didn't understand his legacy, though I grew up in the same state where Father Seraphim grew up. I didn't know this until after I became Orthodox. My feet have touched most of the places on the face of God's earth that Father Seraphim's feet touched. I didn't know that until long after I was baptized. There are a few exceptions to that, but not many. Although he now travels out of the body, I have a friend who's a monk on Mount Athos who, well, like most of the Athonite monks that I've spoken to, I should say all of the Athonite monks I've spoken to about Saint Seraphim of Platina, they consider him not just a saint, but great amongst the saints. The saint that they see so clearly. I couldn't see nearly as clearly as when I was in America. I had great respect for him, considered him a holy man, knew many people who knew him personally, and still my blindness, my ignorance was such that I didn't at all properly estimate his sanctity. When I asked this Athonite elder, who is more of an expert on the life of Saint Seraphim of Platina than probably anybody in Greece, I said, Father, this monk is very well educated, and not only in Greek but also in English, and has a great knowledge of hagiography, both Athonite and historically and internationally. So I said to this Athonite elder, whose name I won't mention because he specifically forbade me to give you his name, I said, Father, the elder was giving me hospitality after I had hiked down from the peak of Mount Athos, and we were talking in the days when I was recovering. Side note, if you're going to hike to the top of Mount Athos, maybe don't start at sea level, go up to the peak and hike all the way back down to sea level unless you planned that. I ended up hiking on Mount Athos at night, which is not a good idea, but this elder was giving me hospitality even though I showed up at probably around midnight. Yeah, not a good idea to get lost in the Athonite wilderness at night. That's a place where there actually are wild beasts of both a spiritual and physical variety. But I said to this elder, tell me, Father, there's nobody on this mountain that knows more about the life of Saint Seraphim of Platina than you. How do you estimate him amongst the saints? Now, I didn't say Saint Seraphim at that time. I just said Father Seraphim. And the elder paused. He said, something like Saint Basil the Great. And I tried to pick up my jaw off of the holy Athonite soil. We were sitting on his porch overlooking the beautiful Aegean Sea. And he said, but maybe not quite to that level, but close. So just to recap, the Athonite elder who knows more about the life of Hieromonk Seraphim of Platina, Saint Seraphim of Platina, now, than anybody in Greece, and who's very, 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 very fluent in the lives of the saints generally, widely read man. That's his estimation, nearing Saint Basil the Great. The only people that have ever met who both know about Father Seraphim of Platina and don't have that view, they have one thing in common. They're Americans. Well, a prophet hath no honor. But there's a part of his legacy which I do believe we, as Orthodox Christians, have neglected to our shame. So I'll tell you. And I'll also let you know that Saint Seraphim's closest disciple, when he had his earthly ministry, and the man who's responsible for carrying forth his legacy, and who did so more authentically than anyone else, that was a married priest who was baptized by Father Seraphim, Father Alexei Young. Then when Father Alexei's wife reposed in the Lord, he became a hieromonk, so that was Hieromonk Ambrose. Hieromonk Ambrose is the one who's responsible for putting his own stamp of approval as Father Seraphim's closest disciple on the revelation that I'm about to share with you. Father Ambrose as well has now departed this life in hope of life eternal. Some of you know this, some of you don't. Okay, so before Father Seraphim was Father Seraphim, he was a young man named Eugene Rose, living in San Francisco in a sodomite relationship with another man. He was, if we were living now, fully out. Eugene Rose was, at this time in his life, obviously prior to his conversion to Holy Orthodoxy, what we would now call openly gay. I don't even like that terminology, but that's what people would say today. And back then, that was early days in American culture at that time. Think mid-late 60s. To be openly before one's family and friends, openly and publicly in a committed relationship with a person of the same sex, cohabiting with said person, was unusual. But Father Seraphim was fully out, and shamelessly, even humbly, it appears his friends thought. It was his lover, forgive me, his boyfriend. It was his boyfriend who told Eugene, who was at that time making a tour of all the religions of the world at the California Institute of Asian Studies. That's what the institution is now called. He was studying all of these ancient religions, but his boyfriend saw that he had neglected to explore Orthodox Christianity. His boyfriend told him, well, you're studying all of the religions, Eugene. You ought to study that one also. And if I remember the story correctly, when Eugene went, at the suggestion of his boyfriend, to the Orthodox Church for the first time, there was a holy bishop in the church kneeling. It was not St. John of San Francisco. It was another saintly bishop who was either in a state of theosis or a high degree of illumination, who was kneeling in prayer in a hesychastic rule inside of the cathedral in San Francisco, in which cathedral later I was the choir director, as it happens, decades later. Father Seraphim saw that man in prayer. Now, Father Seraphim by that point had already analyzed Buddhist spirituality, Hindu spirituality, Taoist spirituality. Pick your pick. Father Seraphim had deeply analyzed, understood, imbibed it. And he had enough sensitivity of soul to know when he was in the presence of a profound person. He saw that saintly Russian bishop in an ecstatic state of prayer, on his knees, in some sort of a hidden place where, of course, before the service began. And at that moment, Eugene, now Saint Seraphim of Platina, had an epiphany. That's how long it took him to know that he had just seen the top of the spiritual mountain. It was one look. It was very, very, very shortly after that that Eugene broke up with his boyfriend. And it appears also broke up with his best gal pal / maybe even girlfriend. Yeah, Eugene went whatever way one could go. So he gave up sodomy and fornication, became an Orthodox Christian, and never looked back. He lived like an ascetic in a tiny apartment in Berkeley, where he had been the youngest tenured track professor ever to get a job washing dishes across the street from UC Berkeley. That was before he was a monk. He lived like an ascetic in a tiny apartment, like a little closet, and he worked washing dishes, quitting his tenured track, yes, youngest tenured track professor in the history of the University of California, Berkeley. But remember, not only did Father Seraphim, by divine grace, defeat the demons of fornication and sodomy in favor of a pure and holy Orthodox Christian life as a layman and then as a monk, you shouldn't neglect that it was his sodomite boyfriend that made the suggestion that he explore Orthodox Christianity. How merciful is God? How merciful is God? Saint Seraphim of Platina, pray to God for us. Amen.